Hello to all Earth citizens and welcome to my Conscious Coaching podcast. This is Dr. Kianush, founder and creative director of MCCG. My Conscious Coaching Group is a non-political, non-religious 501c3 coaching nonprofit with initiatives in healthcare, leadership, and education with focus on emotional and spiritual intelligence. Our vision is to raise self and global awareness for a conscious mind through education and application of EQ and SQ, and our mission is to connect, collaborate, and partner with hospitals, academics, colleges, and medical schools and organizations to embrace growth, self-healing, and self-coaching to achieve well-being and peak performance of individuals and the team as a one connected whole. Today, my very special guest speaker is Dr. Richard Boyatzis, whom I met and learned from first in 2011 at IOC Coaching Conference and followed him and his scientific work afterward in coaching and leadership until today that we are talking in this podcast. Welcome to our podcast, Richard.
Thank you, Kianush.
Just a little bit, I want to say about Richard. Richard Boyatzis is a distinguished university professor of Case Western Reserve University and a professor in Department of Organizational Behavior and Psychology and Cognitive Science. He has a BS in the Aeronautics and Astronautics from MIT and Ph.D. in social psychology from Harvard. His more than 200 scholarly and 50 practitioners articles examine sustained desired change on leadership, competencies, emotional intelligence, competencies development, and coaching, neuroscience, and management education. He is ranked in the top 2% of all scientists worldwide by PLOS Biology based on his citations. His Coursera MOOCs have over 1.5 million visitors and enrolled from 215 countries. His 10 books include the international bestsellers Primal Leadership with Daniel Goleman and McKee, Helping People Change with Melvin and Ellen Van Oosten, and The Science of Change, Discovering Sustained Desired Change from Individuals to Organizational and Communities. Well, Richard, I always ask, my guest speakers that how do they like the world to know them? I know I told a little bit that was just a fraction of what you have done in your life, but how do you like my audience and the world to know you?
My wife and I have been together for over 50 years and we love each other and have a lot of fun. I have 2 golden retrievers that are both adorable and a great source of joy. I enjoy both listening to and playing music, and I like to laugh.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's all my favorite, subject. You started with love, that's what it's all about, I guess. Thank you so much for this romantic touch at the beginning. I loved it. And I like to laugh too. So
good.
I guess we are going to have a fun interview together or discussion.
Right.
Let's put it that way. So, just my first question is just that, I got back to my actually notes in 2011 from IOC conference. I saw that you were talking about the intentional change theory back then. And you have the new book also that is kind of, the same thing, helping people change. But I just wanted you to explain what is intentional change theory after all, and what does it mean and why we need to know about it.
In 1966, I was working as a research rocket scientist engineer at Northrop Norair because I'd run out of money, and MIT got me a job so that I could save enough money to finish my degree. And in the process, I was just so disappointed in how poorly the managers were helping us, those of us who were actually trying to do the work. And in that point, fall of 1966, we were designing a reusable reentry vehicle, a competitor to the Boeing shuttle. And I went back to MIT, disillusioned, I finished my degree, but I decided to start studying something else because although they offered me and my friends a job, I didn't want to do it. And I took a course in psychology from a young professor who was actually hadn't finished yet, David Kolb, his PhD at Harvard. And it was on organizational psychology, which sounded like garbage to me, but, it was something different. But in it, I discovered the field of psychology, and I, fell in love. And for my term project, I had mentioned I wanted to do a paper on how managers did not help their subordinates.
Yeah,
I
interesting.
mean, I was a part of 2 research departments at Northrop, and everybody in the unit, I mean, if you watch Big Bang Theory, it was 2 departments of Sheldon's. I mean, everybody in the unit was anywhere from really smart to scary smart, but we were all weird and all socially, let's just say, backward, including the managers. Anyways, so Dave Culp said he had some new data about how their version of the 30-year-old MBAs helped each other or not. In working on that data, he offered me a summer job. We ended up publishing the paper. He introduced me, and I got into PhD seminars with several with Ed Schein, who became a mentor, and Dave McClellan, who became my thesis advisor at Harvard, and Everett Hagen, who founded the Psychoanalytic Lay Historical Society with Eric Erikson, and a bunch of others. And in the process, in that spring of 1967, is when Dave Kolb and I started laying out what became intentional change theory. So my work on this theory of how do people individually and in our collectives, all the way on up to countries and even global processes, change in sustained and desired ways. And that's, I mean, although we called it something different in those days, it's kind of morphed in terms of the title, but the quest has always been, how do we invoke, help, facilitate, create change as individuals in our dyads, our teams, organizations, communities, countries, like I said, global processes that are desired. I mean, somebody else can study undesired change. I don't want to waste my time with that. I want to study only desired change, and I want to study desired change that sticks, because the research data, even in the spring of 67, it was clear to me in doing some early readings that our ability to create change, whether we're talking as physicians, 50% treatment adherence, nurses, 50% treatment adherence of patients, graduate education, a few competencies are developed, but woefully inadequate towards the things that people are being prepared for. Undergraduate is embarrassing how little most people get more of after 4 years of school. Training and development, there's hardly any effect, maybe an 11% increase in behavior for 3 weeks to 3 months, and then it atrophies. Yeah, and even coaching. I mean, although we have some data now that says coaching can help, which I believe it can, we don't really have the data to say what percentage of coaching helps. On the basis of all of my other research, I'd say chances are 80% of it's not really adding much value. So the challenge is, why are we so bad at it? And my quest has always been to focus on the desired positive. Again, I know there are bad things that happen, but other people can study them. I'm too focused on what helps us move to the life, the families, the organizations, the communities that we dream of, that we think are possible. The fact is that despite all of the lack of progress we have and how much we are bombarded with messages about change is bad, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and all these ridiculous sayings, and at times, I mean, I just posted on a LinkedIn blog this morning. I mean, are we on a cataclysmic path toward oblivion?
Yeah.
No, I don't think we are. And the reason is we've been here before, but we're still here.
Yes.
And, I mean, in 500 BC, there was about 100 years of unbelievable change at the philosophical roots of societies. And in fact, a number of our great religions were founded in that era of around 500 BC. Then there's another huge era of 1450 to 1550 in which almost everything we knew changed. And yet we're still here.
Correct.
So despite all of this, my feeling is we're still here. So what I want to do is I want to study those people, teams, organizations, communities, countries that are able to change in a desired way. And then the question is, can we help invoke it? So that's intentional change theory. That's the quest. Now, I do have to say it is the only of all of the change theories out there of any sort. It is the only one that is a multi-level of fractal theory. I, in fact, because I've been doing research when my colleagues and doctoral students working with me are doing research at all these different levels. But a fractal theory says that the process of change at any one level is identical at the other levels. So it's identical for individuals or couples or dyads or teams or families or organizations or communities or countries. But when you have a fractal theory, you also have to have something that moves. The systems theorists, of which I became a part of, say you have to move information. But I think because these are human systems, you have to move emotion across levels. So that's the quest I've been on. Thank you for mentioning the new book. It's the synthesis of 58 years of my research and a whole lot of other people's relevant research on this process. I take pride in the fact that although I'm synthesizing 58 years of my research and those of my close colleagues and doctoral students, the references in the book are 115 pages long. So it's,
Oh my
I mean,
goodness.
clearly I'm citing a lot of other people's work. But the idea is, I'm not the first person who has been on this quest for what might seem to be the elusive chalice. In this case, a grand unified theory of change. But here I'm talking about sustained desired change.
Yeah, I guess you're not the first person, but I mean, to me, you're the first person that I'm hearing from, and it sticks. So as you mentioned, so it's just your word,
Right.
and your research just makes common sense to the natural human instinct, I guess. The change also as well is changing, and there is a rebound for change. It's easy to change for 1 hour or 1 day or 1 week, but it's not
Right.
easy to change for life. But something that happened to me personally, I had a near-death experience and I died for about 2 minutes and I was brought back with the CPR and I came back, but I felt that I have changed. Unintentional change. So, and that was easy to stick to because it wasn't intentional. But then as you brought the part of emotion, I guess my emotions change, my motivation change.
You bring up a very important point, which is a lot of things happen to us. Actually, more things are unintentional in terms of change or impact on us than intentional. And at the individual level, a person doesn't want to have a heart attack, but some people do.
Yeah.
A person doesn't want to
Yes.
get a neurodegenerative disease, but a lot of people do.
Yes.
Or these other horrible diseases. Natural disasters happen. Wars happen to most people who are victims of other people's bad decisions. So, you put all in pandemics. I mean, who would want a pandemic? Even the most cynical of folks can't contemplate that. So
exactly. Yeah,
when
exactly.
my theory applies to say when people experience undesired or unintentional events, let me say events because it doesn't mean that they changed.
Mm-hmm.
What predicts whether or not they change in a desired way? So in our 2005 book, we had talked about, we called these events that happen in many of our lives wake-up calls.
Yeah.
And the thing that I would say is the number of people who get divorced, who have heart attacks, who have children who sadly die or get diseases, or all of these things, get fired, all of these things that happen to people, and they're wake-up calls. But most people hit the snooze alarm and just go back to sleep. So what I have discovered is a bad event happening to you is not the beginning of a change process. For the small subset of people who then experience something like you did with the near-death experience and then convert it to something positive. See, that's where I think you were different. There are a lot of people, as you know, because you're in this network, that have near-death experiences.
Yes,
I would
exactly.
predict that most of them end up, drinking a lot or taking drugs or doing things because they can't handle it. But it is the smaller subset. I don't know what the percentage is, but power curve distributions would suggest it's maybe 5, 6, 7% of people that have these experiences come out of it, and they're able to morph the experience into something that they see as aspirational or positive. It's why nobody who wants to lose weight will, because it's a negatively framed goal. Every time you think of the goal and think of an action, you have to exercise emotional self-control, which as a physician, stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, the stress system, and it narrows our ability to be open to change. So the very process of having to exercise emotional self-control, which is necessary in a change, ends up curtailing or exhausting the durability of the change process. So that this issue of what is it that can make it sustainable, and that's where, in my theory, the driver of change is not looking at your real self and saying, "Oh, I don't like this person." The driver of change is looking at your vision, your ideal self, your hopes, your dreams, the possibilities. That, I believe, can be a source of energy that just feeds you and if you revisit it regularly, energizes you. So, you and I have known each other intermittently for a number of years, and you've talked about the power of some of your experiences, and they're very inspirational to listen to. But it's not like you talked about it once and that was it. You keep it alive. And I think that's a part of the power of how you feed your energy, because it's not exhausting you. It's the opposite. It's feeding you. It's like all of a sudden, Kianish has become the Energizer Bunny.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the important issue, is when you look at all the people who have unintentional or undesired experiences, what happens?
Yes.
So I'm not casting aspersions on the people who don't make the change. I am merely pointing out that having bad things happen or unintentional consequences does not motivate change. It's the possibilities and the conversion of that experience to something positive. That's what motivates change in a continuing way.
Yeah, you mentioned, you called it as a wake-up call. We call it as a spiritual transformative experiences.
That's right.
And for people like me with an NDE, it's easy because we had the experience, we saw and experienced something that is hard to forget. Actually, I was waiting for a couple of years to forget the experience, thought it's going to go away, but it didn't. So it changed me, in a way, as you mentioned, as my personality, that I'm living in it. It's living in me. And how we can create, that vision and that desire, as a value and purpose, or the soul awakening, or the wake-up call in people to be there and to be energized by their desire or by their soul purpose.
Right.
And I guess that's where it comes, that we need the work of people like you. So, and tell me a little bit about the book the new book, Helping People Change. I was just reading my notes from 2011, and I saw, oh, this is your passion for 10 years, but now I see it's for 50 years.
The new book is The Science of Change, discovering sustained desired change from individuals to organizations and communities. That's the new book. That's the one that's out in October, but it's available for pre-orders on Amazon now.
Wonderful.
The prior book, the 2019 book, was Helping People Change,
Yes.
that I wrote with professors Melvin Smith and Ellen Van Oosten. Which one of the two did you want to talk about first?
I mean, both, if it's possible. So, because we are going to release
Sure.
the podcast, probably your book is on the Amazon published. So, I personally didn't know that it's coming. So, I have the Helping People Change, and I've heard
Right.
about it, in the
So
IEC huddle. So,
Helping People Change, Ellen, Melvin, and I have been, colleagues on the faculty and doing research together. A little over 10 years ago, we formed the Coaching Research Lab at Case Western Reserve because we had since about the year 2000 several faculty and a number of doctoral students doing research on coaching. So we decided to formally make it a lab. And I think since then we've been able to have published 45 journal articles, one book, I think 8 doctoral dissertations, and what was very clear, and if you look at my intentional change theory model, at the heart of the discoveries that enable a person to proceed on a process of the various iterative steps of change, of sustained change, is the quality of our relationships. These we call them resonant relationships. So that became interesting, especially since the very first thing that as I told you, in 1967, I was puzzled by was, how do our managers not help us or help us? And in the ensuing years, I spent a good deal of time in the 70s doing therapy with alcoholics and drug addicts and working in a lot of hospitals, and then working with leaders and executives and other professionals. It became very clear that one of the things that really helps is when people have these resonant relationships. And while for some people, suffering from these very horrible addictions like alcoholism or drug addiction, by forming these relationships at groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a shot at staying sober and rebuilding a life. What's fascinating to me is that and I started actually formally coaching. In other words, working with executives as a coach with that label in 1969. So coaching has been around, as a practice in management circles for many, many decades.
yes.
And we started focusing our research in about the year 2000 within my intentional change theory model on the coaching relationship, because I thought it was a great both relationship to study, but it was also a metaphor for every helping relationship. So in fact, since then, I've had various doctoral students study physician-patient relationships, nurse-patient relationships, teacher-student relationships, of course, coach-client relationships. And nobody in my group has studied, working with us, has studied parent-child relationships. But we decided when Ellen and Melvin and I, we had done a MOOC on coaching that got very popular, we just decided that we'd finally had enough empirical research to say something. I mean, as you know, most of the books published every year on coaching are people telling their story of how they did it or whatever, which is, it can be inspirational and heartwarming. But, as a scientist, I always worry whether or not when you get case studies of one, whether or not you've got anything generalizable or replicable. So, by the time we decided to start writing the Helping People Change book, which was, we started to outline in 2014 and actually got to writing around 2016. But by then we'd had 3 fMRI studies, 2 major studies of hormonal systems, sympathetic, parasympathetic. We'd had 39 published behavior change longitudinal studies.
Wow.
So we had a whole bunch of other studies, but we had a lot of data. Mm-hmm. And what we decided at the time, because we were doing the scientific part with the journal articles, is that we'd write the book for practitioners. So that book is really the 4th in a series of books that I wrote with colleagues that were aimed for people who are in the practice of trying to help others. And in the first three were focused more on leadership, but this one was more on looking at leaders trying to manage and help their subordinates, managers, therapists, clerics, parents, physicians, nurses, coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And the book explains the relevance and meaning of our research, but through stories. So it's a human book, if you will.
Yeah.
My new book, which spans the 58 years of work, plus, as I said, a lot of other research studies and scholarly work, aimed at a different audience. This one is aimed at researchers, scholars, and what I'd call advanced professionals. So it could be practitioners, but they're practitioners who are curious, do a lot of reading, very often have at least one, if not multiple, graduate degrees. So the new book is not, I mean, I do have some stories in it, but it's not written for a normal person to just pick up and read unless they want something to help them get to sleep.
I understand. So I guess that you go deeper to the DNA of change in the new book.
Yes,
so
that's right.
On a scientific level.
A tenured full professor who was a former doctoral student of mine at a major university in the U.S. had read it because I'd asked a number of people who knew my work to read it at different stages of writing it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, boy, you've cracked the code on change. He said, and
I can't wait to see that how your secret is revealed. So then I'm going to go order it on Amazon after this conversation.
Right. So that's really, so, and the twist is helping people change was really focused on how do you help in any of these helping dyads? Like I said, coach, physician, therapist, manager, etc. And we have a section on what we have to do when you're trying to do this in teams. And in one chapter, we address the issue of how organizations have to change. But this book is different because in the science of change, I'm dealing with intentional change theory at all the levels. So I'm citing research and reviewing it at any level in which there's been empirical research.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that up actually, that even before I hear from you, that the change should have many, many levels. It should be building blocks of change. There is the first step, second, third, and there's a time for it as well. So,
well, as you know, as a physician, as well as, a kind of guru within the association or the network that you've created, is that an individual doesn't change by themselves. And in fact, I remember noting this in the early 70s when I was, 4 or 5 years into doing therapy with alcoholics, and starting to work with some of the returning veterans from Vietnam who were drug addicts at the time, that nobody would be able to return to a reasonable family life or job, and return to being a contributing citizen unless we not only helped the individual, but also helped intervene with their family and their work people, their work situation. And if they didn't have a work situation, then we had to help them find one and work with that group. But one of the things I say in one of the chapters is when you look at the examples of teams, for example, the Alexander Klimchuk, who led the Krubera Deep Cavers team. This is a team of scientists who have gone the deepest in the earth that there is, over 7,000 feet in the Krubera caves in Azerbaijan, and held the world's records until a member of his team a few years ago, 2 years ago, exceeded it by, I think, 40 feet or something. But he was a scientist, but he believed in teamwork. And when he would get the folks together for one of the deep caving expeditions, now stop and if you don't know anything about deep caving, let me set the stage for you.
Yes, please.
A team of people are going into holes in the earth that as soon as they get below 100, 150 yards, it's completely dark. I mean, there is no light whatsoever unless you bring it with you. It gets very cold.
Wow.
And you're going in and out of rivers and pools of water. So it's wet. So you are cold, wet, and blind. And the expedition takes 2 to 3 weeks. And at times you're going down shafts that are hundreds of meters straight down. And then you're climbing through and sometimes squeezing through little holes. Other times you have to swim underwater to get around. And this goes on for 2 to 3 weeks. And then after you get to the bottom of whatever cave you're exploring, then you have to get back up. And the biggest competition to Alexander Klimchuk's work as a deep caver was that of Bill Stone, who headed the Chev team that was continued to explore the Oaxaca caves in Mexico. And Bill Stone was, always chasing it. Another like Alexander Klimchuk, PhD scientist, but in Bill Stone's case, he loved not just publishing studies, papers about what he was doing, but he loved inventing things. He invented the deep breather that allowed a lot of these deep cavers everywhere to do what they were doing. But he trained his team a little bit before an expedition to avoid accidents or minimize them, whereas Klimchuk trained for 18 months to 2 years before expeditions. And and he focused a lot on the team and the relationships. One of the people who wrote a book about their experiences on the Chev team with Bill Stone said, on the whole, we were a group of individuals. We weren't really a team. And you keep hearing that repeated. If I looked at music groups and why are groups like Green Day and the Rolling Stones and Metallica able to succeed, U2, and create new music decade after decade after decade, and other groups who might have had some very important, powerful tunes like ABBA or the Beatles, or the Spice Girls or Oasis or the Police, really last, 5, 7, 8, 10 years. And again, what you keep coming back to are the quality of these relationships. And when you look at the quality of the relationships, you find that they very often form a shared vision, not goals, because goals are limiting, a shared vision or dream of what they're doing, their sense of purpose. And they work on the quality of their relationships. They work on understanding and knowing each other deeply, caring for each other deeply. And you continue to see that as a theme. And when you start to appreciate it, you get into another kind of very topical theme in today's world, which is diversity. I mean, you can't innovate without diversity of thought. And if we don't innovate and adapt, we atrophy from the cellular organism to our organizations. And you look at the great organizations that continue to invent new ways to do business, of the Amazon of the world or Netflix or Apple. And you find that part of what feeds their innovation, their consistent innovation, now the current Microsoft under Nadella, not the prior Microsoft. What you find is there is not just an openness to diversity, but there is a drive to include diversity of thought. Now, the thing is that's key is diversity is not just having composition of people of different genders, ethnicities, races, etc. It's having people who have different ways of thinking and building the relationships so that they listen to each other, back to the quality of the relationships. So you can't help people at one level without working at multiple levels. So you can't help a team develop without helping the individuals and the larger community develop. You can't help an organization develop without helping teams and individuals as well as the community of which they're a part of. So the multi-levelness it makes it a lot more complicated. Now, I know why people have avoided it for the history of change in everybody, because consultants don't know how to charge for it.
I see. Yeah.
And academics, you can theorize about it, but doing research on it is damn tough because it takes years to collect sufficient data at all these levels. And, junior faculty are trying to get tenure and they have to publish quickly, and senior faculty don't necessarily have the patience.
Yeah, completely. A couple of good points you brought up. So I guess with the metaphor that you brought up, not a metaphor, that was a real, experience that we all as human in a world of growth and development are the deep cavers. So that's
Right.
and the other things that you mentioned, the multi-levelness of it, that, not only the organizational change, but include the individual change as a team. But also, in my work, when I do the coaching, I see that when I coach a person at some level, coaching starts from who they are at home as a parent, and then how they have a relationship, actually, as you mentioned, with their spouse, with their children. So we are just going back to the coaching kids, and the teens and children and the coaching parents, them coaching the professionals and how they become in their career. But what makes, common in all of this is, as you mentioned, the connection. You call it relationship. I say connection because with my experience, what helps me is connecting with that vision, with connecting with that energy. And I'm connecting with you. We don't have that much of a close personal relationship, but I feel I'm connected to you in some level as a shared vision that we have. So that connection is really helpful.
And an important part here, Janusz, is that the connection is not instrumental.
Yeah.
You and I would not have kind of keep coming back and running into each other and having these opportunities, whether it's on some of the seminars you and I have been participating in, or this kind of an event, if one of us was merely useful to the other. So the thing that's hard for a lot of people who think in very utilitarian terms is that, I'm all for pragmatism, so I don't have anything against pragmatism, but when it comes to relationships, the emotional level is the most important level.
Yes. Yeah, that's
because
what
as
we
you
touched
know,
on.
neurologically, we actually feel before we think.
Yes. We make our decision with our emotions in some
That's
levels.
right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. And my connection with you, maybe it's a funny part. It's just that I have lived in Cleveland, Ohio for many years. So that was the spark.
Right.
But just kidding. So it's just that you have such a, this unbelievable soul. What can is that? It's connect, I guess, to everyone.
Thank you.
So just wanted you to know that how much you are loved by many people. Just going back to our questions is just that how coaching and coaches can help others to change.
Sure. The thing, again, as I mentioned, having been a coach for now almost over 50 years, and studied coaching and looked for outcomes. Do clients change? Do they change their behavior? Do they change their dreams? Do they change in various ways? It becomes very clear that, and when you look at the neurological studies we've been doing, the fMRI studies, one of the tenets of coaching that's required in some of the certification agencies is that every session has to start out with a clear goal. Well, that's wrong.
Yes.
It's not just an alternate, people can approach it different ways. No, I'm saying it's wrong to start a coaching session that way, because when you set a specific goal, you activate the frontal parietal control network, and often because you're establishing something that people feel they should achieve, you activate what's called the ought self and the task positive network, which activates the sympathetic nervous system, which then closes people down to new ideas. So what we have been able to do is to reiterate what certain other research groups have shown, but we've done it in the coaching spectrum, is that if you focus on a problem or you focus on a specific goal, you activate what in my theory is called the negative emotional attractor, which leads people to close down literally their peripheral vision and their openness to new ideas, which stops the change process and it stops its durability or sustainability because you get exhausted by putting out all that effort. I'm not saying that goals aren't useful, but where they're useful is like 70 or 80% down the road on your coaching relationship. In other words, very close to the end of the coaching process or the coaching relationship is when goals are useful. Why? Well, again, if you study both the psychological and physiological aspects of what happens when you set a specific goal or focus on a problem, you literally narrow your attention. And in narrowing your attention, it enables you to get something done, but it also means that you're missing everything else that's out there. No. So if you prematurely focus, you may be focusing on the symptom, not the problem. You may be focusing on the problem, not the opportunity. And you very likely will be focusing on something that reminds people that they should feel guilty, which reduces the likelihood of change or durability of change. So our studies have shown very clearly that when you appeal to a person's vision, their dream, their sense of purpose, it sounds fanciful, but it is. I mean, the question that has the most powerful activation of the networks in the brain that allow you to be open to new ideas is, if your life were fantastic, were ideal 10 to 15 years from now, what would it be like? Why? Because one, we're not talking about 3 to 5 years, because a lot of people will forecast. That's analytic. That goes down the wrong path. You want people to break from reality and to dream. And when people dream, they get in touch with their deeper purpose. Now you're starting to work on core values, on meaning, on purpose. And in that, you start to frame and consider possibilities. And that experience ends up feeling transcendent. And instead of deflating your energy, with the focusing on something and trying to force yourself to not eat that ice cream sundae or not have that second glass of wine, what's happening is when you're thinking about the dream and the purpose, you're opening up your energy. Yes. And so that's one of the current, I would say, myths in coaching. And again, just so that I don't get a lot of angry letters, I'm not saying goal setting isn't relevant, but it's relevant much later in the process, much later than anybody thought. Yeah. Secondly, something that a lot of people, Eric DeHaan has shown this with his work on the working alliance, the relationship, and Shmuley and Grant and Kavanaugh, folks in the various German universities and at the University of Sydney have really done a lot of work on this working alliance with the coach and the client. That's right on. The quality of the relationship, the vision and the quality, the caring quality of the relationship are the two things that we've been able to show help you open up the right neural networks and hormonal systems to be willing to continue to work on and be curious and feel energized by working on some change process.
Yes, and the one other thing that I learned from you is just that how we can model as the coaches, for our clients. And I see a great example that what an exceptional, example and model you are for the coaches and for the people, in the area. So that alone is just setting, I guess, a tune, an example.
Right. Well, thank you. But let me be even more scientific about it. We now know that most humans will infect other humans around them and possibly other primates and mammals with their neurological synapses, with various cognitive events, thoughts, if you will, but it's really emotions, within thousandths of a second. So if the people around you are picking up your vibes, if you will, in thousandths of a second, deeply unconscious, then all of a sudden you realize that the coach is not just infecting the client with the questions they asked, but it's infecting the client with how they're feeling inside. So if the coach is feeling tired and exhausted and, oh my God, I've got to be sensitive for another hour with this person, the client is going to feel that. It
Yes,
doesn't
they
matter
do.
what you're showing on your face. So the responsibility that we have as coaches, as professional helpers, is to first and foremost make sure that we're renewed, that we're excited, that we're inspired. Because if we're not feeling that, we shouldn't be talking to somebody else.
Exactly.
And some of that happens because people start to get burnt out and don't have enough renewal in their lives. It's the coaches, I mean. Some of it happens because coaches try to do too many sessions in a day.
Yes.
Some of it happens because, just because you're coaching, if bad stuff is happening in your family, that's going to come across at a deep, unconscious, emotional level. It is going to hit your client, even though your client has nothing to do with how your teenager is, reacting.
Yes, it's very important, the self-work, on the coaches as well, and preparation, in many levels before we get to the meetings. And one last question. If there is a trauma, which we know life is a trauma rehearsals, but just the little traumas or the big traumas, if there is a traumas, how this process is going to change?
Not everybody. There is a small percentage of the population. It may be larger than people think. We used to think it was 1.6% of the population. Now, there is suspicion that because of technology and diets and all sorts of things, it may be higher, but still, it's a small percentage of the population that are on the spectrum, that suffer from varying degrees of autism, Asperger's, whatever. And that those folks have a dysfunction in what's called the default mode network, which is the network in which your brain is open to all these other messages from people. It's why people who are further on the spectrum have very often difficulty with relationships. Well, in a similar way, what a traumatic incident, not just a high anxiety incident, but trauma does to somebody is parts of your brain shut down, and they shut down, if you will, with an analogy, to preserve you, to create a shield.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, by compartmentalizing it, it allows the human organism to keep functioning, to breathe, eat, etc. But it creates, as you know, an amazing amount of fear and very easily set off triggers for those negative reactions. When people have experienced trauma, the process of sustained desired change can only happen if you can bring them into this positive emotional attractor state. But because the severity of the emotional protective reaction in the brain is so strong that you have to do it very often in small doses. So while you might be able to, in an hour, have a person that hasn't had a traumatic experience talk about their dream or vision, it might take somebody who's experienced trauma 6 one-hour conversations with a coach to start to open up to what might be a dream.
I see.
I know when I'm training my various doctoral students, graduate students, many of whom are surgeons, by the way, in one particular program, one of the things I talk about was sometimes you have to flip to what I call playful questions. So instead of asking the dream question, which I mentioned before, sometimes you have to say to somebody, what if you won the lottery and you just won $80 million after tax? This is very important, after tax.
Yeah.
Which, you don't have to be a financial wizard to know if you invested in a diversified portfolio, at a low commission place like a Schwab or Fidelity, and I'm not paid to endorse their products. I'm just saying they are low commission cost places. But if you invested in a diversified portfolio, it means that you're going to kick off about $4.5 million a year in income every year for the rest of your life. And the idea, well, all of a sudden, that much money, because right away, people say, oh, I'll pay off the mortgage. I'll, set up college funds for my nieces and nephews. You do that in the first month. What does that do for you? And what often happens is even people who are traumatized can sometimes enter the PEA through playfulness. There's another powerful emotion that is not as elusive. Hope is sometimes elusive due to trauma, but compassion is not. And that's where another key dynamic, a key question we have people is to ask people who helped you become who you are. In other words, to get people to think of the people who have helped them become who they are throughout their whole life. And when they do that, most people experience gratitude. And gratitude is one of those deep core emotions that sparks what I call the positive emotional attractor. So again, I think with trauma, you have to be respectful of the fact that the person's rhythm and emotional preparedness to explore possibilities is going to be far limited, and that it's going to take time to get them to that point. So it requires a lot of caring patience.
Yeah. It just reminded me that deep cavers, so they're talking about the trauma, that they need someone to hold their hand going to examine those dark caves together. And I guess that's the role of the coach. It is and can be hard to be there with them, not so they don't feel alone while they're experiencing that fear of discovery in the dark, deep places. And I appreciate many lessons actually on investment as well. So I'm going to go and change my portfolio afterward. And all the lessons of investments, emotional investments as well. So for the dreaming, it's interesting that you use the word dreaming. In a spiritual realm, I use the word, the soul, the visioning, and you use the word compassion. We call it the love that we experience. And that's
we're talking about the same things.
The same things, but in a different tune and music maybe as well. Thank you so much, Richard. Any closing thought and advices, or how our audience can find and know more about you, except your new books that is coming?
Of course, I guess I've just spent a whole number of years doing this scary task of trying to figure out what I've been saying for 58 years. So, the one thing is for people to buy the book, pre-order the book. They said it will be out in October. If you pre-order, I know when people have pre-ordered our earlier books through Amazon, they very often get it several weeks in advance. The other thing is it'll happen in time to make very nice gifts, Halloween presents for your family, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah gifts.
That's wonderful. Yeah, that's a gift of love. I call it the gift of love.
But the key message is that we have a very special gift, this gift of life from our God, and we shouldn't waste it. We should be, yes, there's a lot of bad things that are happening in life and things we have to crawl out of and fight our way through. But when we start to envision the purpose, why we're doing all of this, when we start to feel a sense of possibilities of hope in the future with others, when we start to experience, as you said, the loving, caring relationships, it's just amazing. We start to positively infect each other, and all of a sudden things are happening in your families and in your work organizations that you never thought before were possible.
Yes, exactly.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Richard, for your contagious care and love. You opened our conversation with love, and I think that's a great way to close it as well, that you have a bigger family, actually, that love you too. So all the people that you have impacted with your wisdom. And thank you so much for being here with us today, and look forward to your new book. And I guess you people can find you on the LinkedIn, to connect with you on LinkedIn. And know more about you through there. And I'm going to go and write your new blog. Actually, you posted today as well, after pre-ordering the book. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye to our listeners. And remember, one podcast at a time. Thank you for being with us for another one. You can visit our website at myconscious.org to learn more about us, or write to us at coach@myconscious.org. And please stay connected by following us on our social media platforms, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, not to miss our upcoming episodes and events. Love and light from all of us to you. Make it a great day, everyone.